Hi, I'm Fivelake, and today I will be reading Minecraft fanfiction. I took myself to AO3 and looked at 3 popular Minecraft fanfictions, each of which I will be reading the first chapter of. I do not know anything about these fanfictions priorly, so we're doing this together. The first fanfic I will be reading is called No Cause for Concern by Hedgehoggery. Chapter 1. An interview. In it, "You are such an idiot." Tommy rolled his eyes at his roommate's insults, all too tempted to simply hang up the call. Rambo was generally great to live with. He was organized, hard worker, calm where Tommy was chaotic, and capable of whipping up a mean pasta dish. All that said, however, he was a worrywart. Really, Tommy didn't understand how he saw anything wrong with this plan. "Am not," he responded lazily, gazing up at the skyscraper in front of him. Sunlight glared off the glass. It could have been glowing. "You said I needed a job, so I'm getting one." Rambo's tired sigh was scratchy over the phone. "And of all the places, you thought the Watchtower was the best to go with?" The Watchtower was the shining heart of the city of L'Manberg, and the building that Tommy was currently standing outside of, admiring. It was the base of operations for the many heroes of the city, housing legends from Dream to Filza, the Angel of Death himself. It was also currently hiring. Yeah, he shot back. "Ramboob, I could be working with the Blade, or even Filza Minecraft. Why wouldn't I apply?" "Because you could also end up working with Ghostbur. Oh yeah, forgot about the third member of SBI, did you? The one that arrests vigilantes?" Rambo didn't sound impressed. In Tommy's defense, was he ever? Tommy scoffed. "Yeah, well, he just wishes he were as cool as me." Tommy. "And besides, Ghostbur hasn't caught a vigilante in weeks." That was sort of a lie. Quackity had narrowly escaped capture from both Ghostbur and fellow hero Fundy. Like, 3 days ago. But he had escaped, as he was able to recount the tale to Tommy himself. "It'll all be fine, big man. No worries." "You're putting a lot on the line, Tommy," Rambo said. "Please just be careful." "Always an, Ramboob," Tommy joked back. But he knew his roommate was being serious. The 2 weeks Tommy had already gone unemployed had hurt them in more ways than one. In truth, Tommy wouldn't have applied at the Watchtower if he could have helped it. But, as things were, Rambo was struggling to pay the rent on his own, even considering the cutbacks they'd made on food. If Tommy got arrested, neither of them would have a home. "Call me as soon as you get out, alright?" "Will do." Rambo hesitated. "And good luck. I know I can't stop you." Tommy grinned. "Couldn't if you tried, big man. I'll call you back soon." The teenagers made their hasty goodbyes before hanging up, tension lingering in the air. Tommy glanced at the time warily. He only had a few minutes before his interview. Primes. Things had been so much simpler 2 weeks ago. Sure, their standard of living had probably never been ideal, but they'd always gotten by okay. It had been Tommy and Rambo against the world for a few years now. They'd narrowly escaped the foster system together, rented their own apartment as soon as they were legally able. They both worked full-time during the summer months, took turns sharing the mattress on the floor, and even saved up enough to buy a little TV after a while. And maybe, to most, that wasn't much, but it was the result of their hard work, and they were proud of it. It was home. Of course, nothing in the mad city that was L'Manberg ever stayed the same for too long. One day, you're working happily at Bad's Muffins and More Cafe. The next, you rock up to work only to find the building completely destroyed, and a full police and hero investigation launched to find the culprit, and also your missing boss. Hence, after nearly a year with a stable job and friendly coworkers, Tommy found himself where he was today. It wasn't his role, really. Likely an enhanced individual, the police report had eventually concluded. The damage appears to be power-caused. What kind, we're not yet sure. Enhanced individuals were on the rise like never before, and with them came a plethora of problems. Wannabe supervillains, wannabe heroes who were bad at their job, the whole shebang. Vigilantes were, admittedly, one of them. It was far too easy for troubled young people to fall under the influence of the wrong individuals, and any power could be used to deal real damage, when twisted the right way. All this was the reason for the power registry, and the total ban on power use with the exception of actual heroes. It was a system bound to self-implode eventually, Tommy mused. He and Rambo were prime examples, two enhanced individuals who simply hadn't registered. They weren't allowed to use their powers anyway, so it wasn't like anyone was going to find out. Well, until Tommy had, upon seeing the wreckage of his favorite workplace, decided to become a vigilante. It wasn't his most well-thought-out decision, but thinking had never been his forte. "I'm going to become a vigilante," he had declared upon returning to the apartment that morning, where sleepy Rambo had nearly fallen out of their one chair in alarm. There was no talking him out of it once he had his mind set on the concept, and especially after his first patrol, there was no going back. Because using his powers was thrilling. It was a freedom he had never considered, but when he, for the first time in years, let the power flow through his veins and rush out into existence, he'd never felt better. Tommy had known he was powerful. Memories of playing around with his enhancement when he was a child, though biased by nostalgia, had remained for the most part accurate. Embracing his magic again at 16, however, was a completely different experience. His powers had only grown with him. He was stronger, and he hadn't even trained them yet. Thank primes for that strength too, because stopping crime was a lot more difficult than it looked in the shows on TV. He would most certainly be dead if not for his magic, and as it was, he still took a beating regularly. His first night on the job, dressed in a red hoodie and sweatpants with a roughly made face mask that covered his whole head, he'd returned home battered and bruised. Rambo had freaked. But he was getting better. Each night he went out, he pushed his powers a little more, tested their confines. He had stopped at least a dozen muggings by now, and stopped a few creepy men from dragging unsuspecting victims into alleyways, cars, or the like. Unfortunately, it felt as he got better, the criminals did too. Even today, he was still nursing a bruised arm, hidden under his long sleeves. "Hello," he greeted the young receptionist on the ground floor with a charming smile, fingers crossed. It hid his nerves well. He couldn't afford to screw this up. I'm here for the interview for the assistant position." Hannah, as her name tag gave away, glanced up at him curiously from over her monitor. He supposed he was a sight to behold, really, a little rough around the edges from living in a tiny apartment, if not shockingly handsome. "Tommy, in it?" she inquired after typing rapidly into her computer. "That's me," he said, a weak laugh escaping in an attempt to soothe himself. Hannah nodded. "Floor 87, second door on the left. Filza will be waiting up there for you." Tommy's heart sank to his feet. Filza, as in the Angel of Death, Filza Minecraft? For an interview? For once too shocked for words, he nodded stiffly and forced himself to move towards the elevator. Sure, he'd joked about getting to work with the top heroes, but he wasn't prepared in any way to actually seriously meet any of them. What exactly had he applied for? Maybe he should have read the advertisement a bit more carefully. The elevator ride to floor 87 was horribly, dreadfully long. Tommy rocked back and forth on his feet as he watched the city sink beneath him out the window, trying to expel some of his nervous energy. The doors were opening a little sooner than he expected, and he jumped in surprise. A quick glance at the buttons told him he was correct. They had stopped at floor 63. He nearly held his breath as the soft clip-clop of hooves on the carpet announced the entrance of the elevator's newest occupant. Tommy watched her through his peripherals, staring resolutely ahead and focusing very hard on not dropping his jaw open in awe. That was Captain Puffy herself. Holy crap. "Heyo, kiddo," the sheep hybrid greeted him casually, inputting her own destination. Tommy felt frozen to the spot. He had to kick himself to respond. This was amazing. And terrifying. Yep. The captain shot him a friendly smile, examining him curiously. "Any reason for someone young as yourself is headed to SBI's floor?" Tommy nearly erupted. He was going to SBI's floor? He stammered, words lost on him. Oh crap. He really, really regretted not reading the job description all the way through. Small print always got him. "Interview," he managed to spit out, and then took a comically large inhale, forcing his muscles to relax. "I'm, interviewing for an assistant's position with, Mr. Filza." Captain Puffy snorted a laugh, and immediately raised a hand to cover her mouth, blushing red. "Sorry. That was rude. Okay, this is going on for 9 minutes. There's, so much left of this chapter." Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I'm not reading the entire chapter of this. It would take too long. But, I'm sure something happens. It appears he gets this job, and someone says, "See you tomorrow." So, okay, I'm sorry. Just a quick recap. I didn't realize that like there were so many fanfics about this. Like genuinely every single fanfic about the Dream SMP is just something to do with Tommy. It's shocking to me. It's crazy. Also, I stopped watching this in like literally beginning of 2021. Like I don't remember much that happened in the SMP. Like I just wasn't my thing after a while. So like all of this is like completely unknown stuff to me. It's all shocking. That's my like recap on this first one, and hopefully the next one that I read will be shorter because that took a really long time. The next fanfic I'm going to read is called Passerine. I've heard stuff about this. It's by Blue Jammas, and I've only heard good things, so we shall see. Chapter 1. Like a fox to a burrow, like an eagle to an eyrie. He must have had a life before this, a mother, a father, a home, maybe sisters or brothers, but it had been so long, too long, and now all he knew was this bloody game. His hands knew no other shape than fists curled tightly around a sword, swinging eternally, finding its mark through skin and bone. They all tried to run, of course. They built walls and cowered in corners, but he always found them. Sometimes they begged. Sometimes they chose to jump from cliffs rather than face his reckoning. And sometimes they stared back at him with eyes as empty as his own and welcomed death with open arms. Those were the ones he envied the most. Technoblade never dies, they whispered around campfires and funeral pyres. He prayed that wasn't true. The voices led him to kingdoms and shires and towns. It didn't matter what they offered him in return. The voices didn't demand coin, they demanded blood. He fought for bold men and stupid men, greedy kings and starry-eyed rebels. He fought for armies doomed to fail and dragged them into the light of glory. He had lost count of how many allies he'd fought beside. After a time, their names and faces had faded into the recesses of his hazy memory. And then there was the Angel of Death. He was one of the very few people with a reputation that matched Technoblade's. He'd heard of the angel through whispered stories and snatches of tavern gossip. I heard he has an obsidian wings, one patron would say to the other over a cup of ale. I heard he once massacred an entire army, all by himself. He makes even the green god afraid. Technoblade had begun to imagine a ruthless man, an immortal butcher with the same wretched grin as his. But Filza was not an avenging angel. He was just Filza. They'd met by coincidence in a land of ice and snow. It was barren, but they made quick work of it, together, first as allies and then as friends. Through it all, Filza had smiled instead of grinned, laughed instead of cackled. On calmer days, they'd while away time with tea and chess, and silent meditations that quieted the screaming in Techno's head, if only for a little while. You know, Techno had said during one of their sparring matches, they had to stay in shape, of course, because peacetimes never lasted long as people hoped. The stories never talk about this side of you. Filza had paused, a small, amused smile on his face. Oh? He'd said. What do the stories talk about then? They call you the Angel of Death. Techno dug his heels in as Filza resumed an onslaught of blows with his dulled sword. They said that you leave a path of destruction in your wake that nothing, ha! Techno parried and went on the offensive, that nothing is sacred to you. Their blades met. They pushed against each other, trying to gain an upper hand, and it was only because they were standing so close that Techno noticed a shift in Filza's eyes, a momentary coldness that was as brutal as the blizzard raging outside. It was there and gone in an instant. Light returned, and Filza laughed as he pushed back against Techno's sword. Stories are curious things, Filza said as he swung again, barely giving Techno time to dodge. Some of them are true. He moved so quickly, Techno could do nothing but stand there as Filza rushed him with a hilt to the ribs, knocking Techno backwards onto the training room floor. Techno scrambled to his knees, but Filza was already standing over him with his sword held high above his head, his eyes glimmering with an emotion Techno couldn't place. For once in his immortal life, kneeling there in front of the first person he called friend, Technoblade felt hunted. And then, Filza lowered his weapon. He smiled gently down at Techno, the soft smile Techno was used to, and offered Techno a gloved hand. And some of them are not, Filza finished. So, best 2 out of 3? "You're a bastard," Techno said playfully, even as the voices screamed, "Run, run, run." He took Filza's offered hand and pulled himself up beside the man that he was sure could have cut him in two, no matter how dulled the sword's edge was. No matter how dulled the sword's edge was. As Filza patiently moved Techno through all the things he'd done wrong, small things like foot placement and his hilt grip being an inch off, Techno found it equal parts amusing and frightening that, despite his eons of bloody fighting, it only took a few minutes of sparring for Filza to find flaws in his technique. But then again, Techno's technique wasn't particularly polished. It took only one brutal swing to fell most people. Something told him that Filza would be harder to kill than that. They conquered nations, he and his golden-haired friend. They were bathed in glory, twin gods shining in the middle of a bloody field. But as their empire grew, so did their enemies. They came in droves, day after day, and before long, Techno had forgotten what peace tasted like. The days were long and the nights were longer. Every flicker of movement was a spy in the shadows. Every ally was a potential traitor. Every word was a declaration of war. Their home had become a target for 1,000 armies. Through it all, his one constant was Filza, until he wasn't. Technoblade simply looked up one day from a map detailing enemy lines and realized he'd been talking to empty air. He had no idea how long he'd been alone, sitting in a dusty library with stale tea untouched in the corner. He had no idea if Filza ever said he was leaving, or if he simply went as he arrived suddenly, swiftly, like a snowstorm. Afterwards, there was hardly any point in maintaining the empire. The voices were getting bored anyways. They wanted more, a fresh fight, more stories. So Techno took his sword and his shield, an abandoned ship. He'd done it 1,000,000 times before, but the thought of a chessboard lying unused in a crumbling castle made him feeling somewhat close to regret. Technoblade wandered the world, trying to appease the voices. Neither of them were ever satisfied. No matter how much chaos he dealt, there was always more work to be done. So he worked. He had no idea for how long. All he remembered from that bloody time was a sense of unfulfillment, like a story had been left unfinished halfway through. Years, decades, maybe more, it hardly mattered. In the end, he knew, it would all be the same. The world would end and he would remain, always fighting, always alone. That's technically not the end of the first chapter, but there's like a lot more, and I would like to read more stuff. So we're gonna move to the next one. I think this is really interesting so far. I always notice sort of like minor issues grammatically, but it's not the end of the world. This does look really interesting. I can understand why people would be very entertained by this. But yeah, on to the next one. I'm nostalgia baiting you guys. Let's get real. For the last fic, I tried to find the first Stream SMP fanfic. I don't think this is the first, but based on the searches I did, this is the first one that showed up. It's from August 6th, 2020, and it's called I Can Hear the Music of Color by an Orphan Account. It's a hot day at the football field. There were fewer clouds in the sky and barely any wind. As the whistle blows, the band teacher yells to take 5 and everyone scatters to the bench. When they reach for a water bottle, it's like heaven already. Most people sat on the hot grass and took sips of the cold, fresh water. 2 people hissed when sitting on the burning metal bench. The young man takes one gulp of his water bottle. He sighs of relief after drinking. "Bro, it's so hot," he complained. He wipes the sweat under his white sweatband. "Marching band sucks." "Then why are you here?" a guy with sunglasses scoffed. "Shouldn't you be in an orchestra?" "Yeah, but I know how to play snare," he huffs proudly. "Plus that means I get to spend time with my favorite person, Georgie Poo." He brings George close to his arms, hugging him tight. The dark brown-haired man struggled from his grip. "Oh my god, Sapnap, stop. You're getting sweat all over me." He tries to push away from him, but it has no use. However, George keeps sweating by struggling. Sapnap chuckled and gave a small kiss on his flushed cheeks. George turned his away head to get any future kisses, even though he leaned to it. At least that's what Sapnaps thinks. Oh my god, you guys are gross. A man in a green tank top pat Sapnak on the back. It's a bit of a surprise that a new snare player dated a clarinet player. It was like a weird rivals to lovers story. Ironically, it's like the colors of red and blue. The reason they only get along because of their friend Dream and the retired band teacher. Now they're too intimate. Snapnap flirting with George. Guys, I can't read this. I'm so sorry. I can't. There's no grammar. No, this is terrible. Oh my god. I can't keep reading that. I'm sorry. Um, what the hell? What the hell was that? Anyhow, I hope y'all enjoyed me reading fanfics. If you'd like me to read any other ones, please let me know because I will do it. Yeah, I don't know. But anyhow, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and again, comment what other ones I should read, or if you'd like me to read more of Pass Ring, because that's the only one I'm gonna read more of. I don't even remember what the first one I read was, but I spent 10 minutes on it. So, yeah. Bye bye. Subscribe to Fivelake.